How's business?
Unpredictable.
Welcome back to Kippy's Quest. Regular viewers will know that we've been away for a while working on the Fool's Journey Part 3, but now we're back and ready to carry on eating the ritual magic pie. Obviously, I've now worked my way through all of the individual cards, so for the next few weeks I want to focus on some of the more practical aspects of tarot. That's going to be things like actually reading the cards, the different spreads you can use and how to interpret them. Anyway, I thought a good place to start would be to talk about why I got into doing this practice at all.
A brief history of Kippy and the tarot. So my journey with the tarot started when I began studying ritual magic a few years ago. At the time I was a fully confirmed and bona fide atheist. I'd attempted all sorts of spiritual practices, from Christianity to Buddhism, but had found that despite my best efforts, nothing really seemed to resonate with me.
Bugger this.
So I'd come to the conclusion that any kind of spirituality seemed to do more harm than good, and was probably all a load of old cobblers anyway. I held that belief for a long time, and was happy to argue with anyone who felt differently. However, what I didn't realise was that atheism was just another step along my journey, and I would eventually come out the other side. That began when I came across a book called Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig. Here I found a spiritual practice that seemed to rely less on dogmatic faith and more on tangible results. At the beginning of the book, Donald requests that the reader obtain a tarot deck. Fortunately, I already owned one, having been vaguely interested in tarot previously. However, I'd abandoned the practice as I found it far too complicated and confusing.
Bugger this.
But this time was different. Donald introduced the subject in a very easygoing way, using only selected cards from the major arcana and offering simple descriptions to get me started. This time it just clicked. And from that moment on, I was hooked.
Kippy's Quest. Kippy's Quest.
Kippy discovers ritual magic.
Now, I still maintain that Modern Magic is the best book you can buy if you're interested in ritual magic and want to start doing something practical as quickly as possible. I've got a video coming up on spreads, and I'm going to include the one in this book that got me started because it's excellent. But I digress. The reason I started using the cards is because I found they were just giving me a very clear insight into my life that I'd never experienced before. From there I realised that they're also completely integral to ritual magic, and have got most of the teachings tucked away in there somewhere, ready to be discovered. Finally, I became obsessed with the Fool's Journey, as you can probably tell because I keep making videos about it. For anyone who doesn't know, the Fool's Journey explains how the minor arcana literally plots out the metaphysical journey of life, from a place of zero understanding to complete spiritual transcendence. Oh yes, the tarot was definitely for me.
And me.
You are the tarot. Of course it's for you. None of this is to say that I abandoned science in favour of religion. I still consider myself to be a very rational person. Observable and measurable reality still comes first here at Kippy's Quest, but I just don't believe that modern science is capable of quantifying the human experience. If you want to figure out how the planets revolve around the stars, or why certain kinds of food give you the shits, then science is your man, every time. On the other hand, it's not quite so good at explaining what we're doing here in the first place. I've come to the conclusion that science is excellent at explaining the how, but pretty useless at explaining the why. So how about we combine the two things and see what happens? Aleister Crowley claimed that both his work and that of his followers adhered to the method of science, the aim of religion, asserting that a magician's true abilities could to some extent be objectively evaluated. This is why practitioners of ritual magic tend to keep diaries, where we can record the results of certain rituals and see how they're affecting our lives. In other words, we apply the scientific method to spirituality. In this sense, we're less focused on faith and more interested in whether what we're doing is actually working for us. Add to that the fact that this is the first spiritual practice that I actually enjoy and doesn't feel like a drag, and hopefully you can see why I've come full circle on the whole concept. Obviously this means that I've now rekindled my relationship with the big guy. How you doing?
Not bad considering you've ignored me for most of your life.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. I've been around for 13.7 billion years, so I've developed a thick skin.
There's a lot of religious imagery in the Waite-Smith and Thoth decks, and that would have put me off in my old life, but it makes much more sense to me now. Ironically, it was studying the occult that got me back into reading the Bible. Who'd have thunk?
God, is it true that 1,000,000 years is like a second to you?
Yes, it is.
And is it also true that £1,000,000 is like a penny to you?
Yes, it is.
God, can I have a penny?
Yes, just give me a second.
Kippy gets all psychological.
So I've talked about the ritual point of view. I always keep the major arcana on my altar so I can draw a card as part of my practice. However, it's the psychological aspect that I'm particularly drawn to and how that's benefited me over the years. I'm going to get pretty metaphysical here, so strap yourself in. Carl Jung once said, "We can predict the future when we know how the present evolved from the past." That is exactly how I approach the tarot. I've always said that the cards don't tell us the future, they tell us the present.
But surely we already know the present. It's happening right now.
I don't think we do. We've got our take on the present and how we interpret it, but our lives are so influenced by other people and all the things that are happening elsewhere that it's impossible to know what's really going on all the time. I think the tarot can give us a few hints about that, and if we've got a better idea of what's going on in the present and how we got here, then we can get a pretty good idea of where we're heading in the future. Now, many tarot readers will say that they find it much easier to read the cards for other people than they do for themselves, and I definitely fit into that group. I think the main reason is that it's a lot easier to ask other people difficult questions than it is to ask our own selves. However, if we really want to get to know ourselves, then sitting down and doing a spread is one of the best ways to do that. I've always said that when you're doing a reading for yourself, it's a lot like having a conversation with yourself.
Is it normal to talk to yourself? Yes, it is. Oh, thank God for that.
Very often I'll ask myself a question, start shuffling the cards, and find that I've got half an answer before I've even put the first one down. This is because I've taken the time to sit and actually think about something that's on my mind, instead of just letting it fester away in the background. I think that asking ourselves questions is something that we don't do anywhere near as often as we should. So I've talked a lot on this channel about consciousness, but now I want to talk about unconsciousness. It's estimated that only 5% of our minds are actually conscious. I'm not talking about the myth where people say that we only use 5% of our brains, because that's been debunked. Here we're talking about what's going on under the surface. Now, there are differences between the terms unconscious and subconscious, but for the purposes of this, we're just going to stick with the term unconscious, or we'll be here all day, and I need to put the sprouts on. Carl Jung described the unconscious mind as somewhere to store our repressed memories, forgotten experiences, and unresolved conflicts, so you can see why it's generally the focal point in any kind of psychoanalysis. He said our conscious mind is like an island that sits in the middle of this vast ocean of the unconscious, which we're not aware of, but it manifests itself through our thoughts, emotions, and actions in the so-called real world. This is much like how the universe is mostly composed of dark matter and dark energy that we can't actually see or experience, but we can see the effects of. So when I say have a conversation with yourself, I'm referring specifically to communicating with your unconscious mind, that hidden part of us that dwells within and carries all our dreams and hopes and fears and all sorts of other mysterious things.
So what happens when our unconscious wants to have a conversation with us?
Well, many believe that's what dreams are, but that's another video for another time. Now, I think the reason that most of us are here, including me, is because we're looking for answers. Whether that's an answer on how we can progress in our spiritual development, whether we should wear the pink crushed velvet suit to the wedding, or why we seem to keep choosing the wrong romantic partner over and over. The answers are all there, swimming about in this vast ocean of the unconscious, but we need to find a way to fish them out. Jung believed that this aspect of ourselves doesn't understand words, so it's no good trying to have an actual chat with it. He said the unconscious communicates through symbols and images. So how does any of this connect to tarot cards? Well, Jung believed in something called the collective unconscious. This is the idea that the deepest parts of our minds contain knowledge of certain symbols and archetypes that have been handed down to us over thousands of years. I tend to think of this in the same way that a spider instinctively knows how to spin a web without ever being taught, or the way that pufferfish make those crazy geometric patterns on the ocean floor without ever going to crazy geometric pattern school. Some knowledge just seems to transmit across the generations, and this extends to things like angels and demons. They're all part of our history as a species, and now they belong to us just as they did with our ancestors. L'Homme Duquette says whether we consciously recognize them or not, these are the archetypal images that we share with every other human being on the planet. I genuinely believe that certain symbols and archetypes are baked into us and we've inherited them. Well, the tarot is absolutely covered in these symbols, and the major arcana is a depiction of archetypes, so this would suggest that there's a hidden part of ourselves that understands these images better than we do. Arthur Edward Waite says the tarot embodies symbolical presentations of universal ideas, behind which lie all the implicits of the human mind. And it is in this sense that they contain secret doctrine, which is the realization by the few of truths embedded in the consciousness of all. Therefore, it makes sense that getting the cards out and doing a reading is the perfect method for having a conversation with ourselves.
Calm down, John. It's just a minor operation.
But my name isn't John.
I know. I'm talking to myself.
Fortune telling or divination?
Speaking personally, I don't believe the cards can tell us our actual future. Now, I'm not here to contradict anybody's beliefs. I'm just here to tell you what I believe. Or don't believe in this case. And that includes the idea that anything has the power to tell us our literal future. I think this is what marks the difference between fortune telling and divination. Fortune telling tends to be a lot more specific. It can relate to certain dates and yes-no questions, or whether something specific will happen, or not happen, depending on the context. It's also often used as a kind of entertainment. Sometimes people get their cards read just for a bit of fun. In this case, people usually want to be told what they already know because they're treating it like a kind of magic trick, but I've got no problem with that. I know some people might say that it's an industry of con men and shakedown artists, just out there trying to see what they can pull, and there's probably an element of that kind of thing going on, but for the most part I think it's all pretty harmless. It just doesn't align with my philosophy. As I said earlier, I came to the tarot through studying ritual magic, and that is defined as the art and science of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Now, if little cards with pictures on them can tell us the future, that would mean the future is predestined. And if the future is predestined, then what becomes of our will? This is why I always tell people not to take a fatalistic view when they get a scary looking card, or a reading that comes across as a bit negative. Remember, it's not up to us the hand we get dealt, but it is up to us how we play it. Forewarned is forearmed, and we can always use that information to make the right decisions in the future. Divination is where you start to dig a little deeper. It's less concerned with what will happen and more concerned with why things happen. It ventures into the deepest parts of ourselves in a way that connects us to the divine, as the name implies. This is achievable because we're all a replica of the universe in miniature, just like a fractal that contains smaller and smaller copies of itself. As above, so below. We connect to the symbolism on the cards at a level that we can't perceive, but it allows us to glimpse behind the veil to the real truth about ourselves. Dion Fortune says it is for this reason that divination is possible. That little understood and much maligned art has for its philosophical basis the system of correspondences represented by symbols. The correspondences between the soul of man and the universe are not arbitrary, but arise out of developmental identities. So I've talked about some pretty lofty and metaphysical things here, but generally the goal of doing a spread is to gain some insight into a problem or a situation, or to get some guidance about a decision that we need to make. Now, I think one of the most important aspects of a good tarot reading is the way it gets you thinking about something in a way that is limited to that spread. Don't take limited as a negative thing. Sometimes pushing ourselves to think within the confines of a certain paradigm can reveal all kinds of truths that we might miss otherwise. The beauty of the tarot is that it gets you to look at things from a certain perspective that you may not have considered. When people say things to me like, you know what, I'd never thought about it like that before, or it never crossed my mind that that could be the reason for this situation. To me, that is the true magic of tarot at work. When it shows us our lives from another point of view, that is the power of a good reading. Anyway, this video has been all about the why, but the next video is going to be all about the how. I'm going to talk about the practical methods I use for reading the cards, and how those methods have been a constant source of inspiration in my life. For now, I'm going to leave you with another quote from Dion Fortune about how each of us is connected to the divine. She says, "A man's soul is like a lagoon, connected with the sea by a submerged channel. Although to all outward seeming it is landlocked. Nevertheless, its water level rises and falls with the tides of the sea because of this hidden connection. So it is with human consciousness. There is a subconscious connection between each individual soul and the world soul, deep hidden in the most primitive depths of subconscious, and in consequence, we share in the rise and fall of the cosmic tides."
Thank you for enduring yet more craven ramblings. If you're a masochist who enjoys listening to this buffoon, then please subscribe. May the coming days bring you good fortune. Until next time.